I was just trying to jump.
Isn't the math done by the system that you use?
Yeah, but you might also do a market analysis within the addendum, and they'll have little grids in there, little spreadsheets, and you want to check their math. But yeah, I would, once again, going back to what you guys are dealing mainly with is lender work, it's probably not going to be there. And yes, the math is done by the software that they use.
So are you saying that if there's 3 comps, they should be an average of their net, not weighted towards one side?
No. I'm sorry. Averaging is a dirty word in appraising.
Well, what does it mean, weighting?
Weighting means that I use 6 comps. The reason I put comp number 1 in the number 1 spot is it's most similar to the subject property. Like one of my canned comments is I gave most weight to comparable sale number 1 because it required the least amount of gross adjustments. Otherwise, it just required the least, it's most like the subject property. And that's what you'll have more weighting and weighting. For example, like I said, where the lender had me required to throw 2 more comps on there, I literally in the addendum said, I give no weight to these comps. They're in here because they're closed within 90 days. Because I didn't want to ever get...
The weighting, I don't understand, is it the position?
The weight...
Position is the most important?
Well, ideally, yes, but I've seen reviews where the narrative will say, I gave him the most weight to comp 3.
Is there a quantification of that, or is it just...
Nope, that's the opinion of the appraiser and the analysis. But what it should be, like I said, the easiest way to look at it is the one that's weighted most is the most like the subject. It's your apple to apple. So if you're saying the gross adjustments on, I gave them the most weight to comp number 1 and the gross adjustments were 30%. As a reviewer, I'd look at it and go, oh, okay. Especially if, say, the gross adjustments on 2 or 3 were less than that. It's more similar. Yeah.
But does it state in there how much percentage was weighted to number 1 or number 2?
No, a lot of times in the narrative it'll say, I gave the most weight to comp 1.
That's it.
And it won't say because X amount of percent. Like I said, one of my standard comments is I will say, I weighted number 1 because it had the least amount of gross adjustments, which is my way of saying it's the most like the subject property. Yeah. But that's where the analysis and opinion of the appraiser comes in. Now, who wanted to do the income approach? Was this for commercial property or for residential? Oh, for residential? Residential, the biggest challenge is identifying your typical buyer and seller. If you're talking about single family, obviously if it's 2 to 4 units, then your typical buyer, you can look at it and saying whether it's going to be an owner occupant with a rental, or just a rental property. I think most appraisers, and it's not incorrect, will make the assumption that duplex, triplex, or fourplex is an investment property, and that's the way they're going to look at it, because it would be, unless there's a lot of information provided in the MLS listings, it's going to be really hard to show a differentiation between an owner-occupied duplex and just a purely rental duplex.
First-time buyer might have to, live in a 2 or 3 bedroom if they want to live in a nice area. So a lot of times I see that they use the income approach to help the buyer qualify what they want.
Oh, you mean for the qualification? Being able to, yeah, I know that's a lender requirement. Is they're saying, I don't. I appraise it as a duplex. I think the question is, you're saying how the buyer qualifies to buy a duplex. They take into consideration some of the extra income for their debt to income. What is it? Is it the debt to income ratio?
That sounds good.
Yeah. That, to be honest, that's not an appraiser thing. That's a lender guideline. Is how they'll qualify.
What about how do you do the income approach in a commercial property?
That has to do with the rents, the lease status, and the cap rates. On residentials, 2 to 4s, it tends to be gross rent multiplier. But also, I would say on duplexes, it has to do, I do give a lot of weight to price per unit, because it tends to be a good indicator of value, is price per unit on duplexes. But yeah, for the income approach on residential properties, it's gross rent multiplier. Gross rent multiplier? Yeah.
And in a commercial?
Commercial, and it depends on what commercial property you're talking about, because you have different classes of property. You have office, and you have retail, and you have industrial, you have apartments. One of the things I always tell people is that I'm licensed to do both residential and commercial. I think on the residential side I can do anything. If you ask me to do a high-rise office building, I would refer you to my mentor, because I don't do those. My specialty on the commercial side would be apartments and small retail. Yeah, because in commercial you end up being very property specific. Or property type specific. Yeah. Yep. All right.
I have a question on the zoning. When do you incorporate zoning into your appraisal?
In what context? Like highest and best use, or?
Yeah, highest and best use.
Well,
Because of the new regulations where if you have a larger lot, you can put a second unit on it. And I just went through that with one.
yeah. Going back
One
to.
reason this property value higher was because it qualified for a second unit.
Yeah. So in all appraisals, whether they're residential or commercial, the first question you're asking is highest and best use. The 4 tests of highest and best use are physically possible, legally permissible. Oh, I'm going to fail this maximally. But one of the things I always jump to first is legally permissible. And that in most residential appraisals, if you got a house on a 6,000 square foot lot in a house tract of 5 or 1,000 homes, the highest and best use jumps out at you and says it's residential, because that's all it's going to be used for. Yes, the more interesting appraisals and assignments you get is when the highest and best use is in question, and that's when you start asking, what would the market do with the property? Highest and best use, simple example, kind of touched on it before, is in Palo Alto, old houses, they tend to be bulldozed and just, in their land. So it's like when I do that appraisal, I'm not doing a house appraisal, I'm doing a land appraisal, because my determination of highest and best use is that house is functionally obsolete, it doesn't really add value anymore, so then you go toward that. Highest and best use example of zoning is like in Willow Glen, you'll have some houses that used to be residential and got rezoned to commercial, so then you have to figure that out. But yeah, the first question in appraisal practice is, well, you define the problem, and part of defining the problem is trying to figure out the highest and best use. I didn't really touch on that too much.
Information on the table for the appraiser when he came. I had our permits for when they added onto this particular house, and I had the zoning.
Did the zoning go from residential to commercial?
No.
Oh.
It's residential, but it qualifies for a second unit.
Oh, okay.
And they hadn't put a second unit, they'd added on to this house, and so in fact, the first thing I did when I didn't match county records is I went and got the permits, called an appraiser friend of mine and said, would you go out and measure the house for me?
Oh, okay, yep.
And he did,
Yeah.
and he said, I just got to see the permits, looked at the permits and the drawing, and everything was all there.
What was the definition of value? Was it as is, or was it as complete, or because that's the other thing.
Completed. It was all done.
But you were saying you were frustrated with them because they weren't giving value to a possible structure, or?
All I'm saying is we had it work because first of all I started off with getting an appraiser to come out and measure the house.
Yeah.
And document. Yes, the county records never got updated. So this is what it is. Here's the permits. He looked at them. I started there, and then when the appraiser came out for the lender, we had that, plus I also printed out the zoning and then got the statement from the planner of what they could do in that property.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had that, I'm just saying, if we do our homework.
Oh no, believe me, as an appraiser, and especially for those appraisers out there that are under the pressure of turning and burning a report, everything you possibly can give them is very helpful, and it will.
At the table.
Yeah, I just left it all.
Well, that the permit stuff, that's you got to research anyway. Yeah.
Right, and,
Yep.
but that, and back to Daly City, the thing that's neat about Daly City, because I had a client drag me up there, and I'm like, oh, right, this is going to be fun. But Daly City has a really neat program with the city where, as a seller, you can pay for, or the buyer, pay for a report, and they give you a report of exactly everything that's been done on that house.
Yeah.
Back from when it was
Yeah.
built.
Yep.
And because they had that ordinance that they passed a number of years ago, again, so that you could take that downstairs basement area and convert it into living quarters, as long as one of the people in the residence was the owner, or had to be owner occupied. And so you could rent so, and it was a really neat report, and once you got that and had that for the appraiser, this has all been, and then it shows that.
Yeah,
You had the.
different cities to have definitely varying information available. Yeah.
Required.
So trying to wrap this up, and I've kind of touched on this, when you ask questions like an appraiser, be specific. And I cannot also emphasize anymore, have market data. You can't just tell, you guys, if you're experienced in here, you can't just tell an appraiser, I don't like your comps. First address the given sales, neighborhood, market, etc. From my perspective as an appraiser, if you just provide me with 3 comps that you think are going to make your value, you know, people take it personally. They'll say, well, no, my value is better. So that's why I say when I do my review process, I look to see if there's any weaknesses in the data that was used, or just mistakes. And if you have mistakes, then you should be able to throw those comps out that you don't like if you find legitimate mistakes in the data. Then introduce the new sales information or neighborhood or market conditions. And then if the subject is superior, have proof. Otherwise, have proof of the permits. Yes?
So if you find that mistake, which was a comp used a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
how can you get that your turnaround appraisal quickly?
That's not my answer. I don't have an answer to that. That's the lender.
Like trying to get to the appraiser saying, okay, this is critical now because the seller's putting it back on the market
Yep.
because our appraisal's not working
Yeah.
here. But we